We're excited to welcome Dr. Roy Heidicker tonight to give this presentation called D-Day, the Great Crusade. Dr. Heidicker received his PhD in history from the University of Southern California. He was also the operations manager for the film school and the event manager for the university. He served in the United States Marine Corps and locally was the 4th fighter wing historian for 15 years. Please welcome Dr. Heidicker.
I think my mic is on. Can you hear me? Yes?
Everybody hear him?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. Like Anna said, this is the 80th anniversary of D-Day. So got the big picture, got a lot of little pictures, a lot of stories. If you have questions, please hold them towards the end. The Great Crusade, and you'll see why we call it the Great Crusade. Beginner's history of invading across the English Channel, very important over the course of history, not just World War II. 55 AD, Julius Caesar did it, very important. 1066, William the Conqueror did it, conquered England. And then 1798 to 1802, Napoleon really wanted to invade England because England was a thorn in his side, but he couldn't do it because the English owned the sea. Then in 1940, Hitler wanted to cross the English Channel, Operation Sea Lion, but after losing the Battle of Britain, he elected not to. Very glamorized picture of Julius Caesar. Didn't really look like that, but what the heck. Napoleon and Hitler, blocked by the Channel. What would their empires have been had they crossed the Channel? This is Europe, June 6, 1944. Everything in red is Germany. Everything in that kind of light brown is neutral. Blue is the Allies. You can see the Russians are almost completely out of Russia. They're marching towards Germany, which is very, very significant. Now, at this time, we call Europe Festung Europa, Fortress Europe. The Atlantic Wall extends all the way from Denmark down to the Spanish border. The summer of 42, 15 divisions are added to the defense, along with coastal guns, pillboxes, mines. The Germans they know we're coming, so they're getting as ready as they can. Now, in World War II, the key land weapon is the tank. So the important question for the Germans is, where do we put our tanks? Where do we put our panzer divisions, knowing that the invasion is coming? Another example of some of the deadly stuff the Germans had waiting for us. Now, why didn't D-Day happen sooner? Large reason was the British. Their memories of the Somme in World War I and Dunkirk and Dieppe in World War II, they weren't looking to get back on the continent so quickly. And the UK was more interested in protecting the sea lanes in the Mediterranean and in the Suez Canal, leading up to the North Africa campaign. The US, well, we're tied up in the Pacific, and we're building armies and armaments, and to a large extent, we're letting the UK, Churchill and his generals, take the lead in planning what we're going to do. This is Dunkirk in 1940. The British rescued 300,000 men, but it was a defeat. Now, who's pressing for an earlier D-Day? Well, Stalin. Russians for years are hanging on by their fingertips. So they want the Allies to invade France to draw the Germans away from the Russian front. But by 1944, the Russians are decisively winning and moving west. If the Western Allies don't invade France, Russia's not going to stop in Germany. Russia's going to go all the way to the Atlantic, and this is very much on our minds. Joseph Stalin, oh, Uncle Joe. Now, in a lot of ways, by not invading sooner, we were not great allies to the Russians, because like I said, if the Germans had knocked them out of the war, it would have been bad for everybody. But when we went to the Russians and said, hey, we're going to invade France, can you try to draw some of the Germans away from us, they said, be happy to. So simultaneous with D-Day, they launched Operation Bagration. And compared to D-Day, It was huge, much bigger than D-Day was. Many times the size of the forces involved in D-Day. One of the things we'll talk about is the disparity between German power fighting against the US and England and Canada as compared with fighting against the Russians. We'll look at the leadership in the US and the UK. FDR, Winston Churchill. Churchill famously said when Pearl Harbor was attacked, that was the first time he got a good night's sleep in quite a long time, because he knew the US was in it. Close relationship even before Pearl Harbor, but Churchill kept the Allies from invading France as long as he could. FDR's in the loop, but he lets his generals and admirals plan grand strategy and tactics. Churchill doesn't do that. He interferes all the time. Now, when we finally get to D-Day, no interference from either. But up until then, touch and go. And Eisenhower dealing with Churchill, really, really tough relationship. Speaking of, my guy, West Point class in 1915, the class the stars fell on, began World War II as a one-star brigadier general. So he is advancing rapidly through the ranks, and the reason is he can get allies to work together. That's what George Marshall saw in him. That's why he's made the supreme commander of Operation Torch, the invasion of Africa. He's the supreme commander for D-Day and beyond, and he is the best guy for the job. Here he is with his staff. Now, his primary lieutenants, first of all, Field Marshal Montgomery, defeated Rommel at El Alamein. Of course, he had all of Rommel's plans, made it a little bit easier. He's very cautious, does not play well with others. He's in charge of all the land forces initially. Air Marshal Tedder, Ike's deputy, coordinated the air power. He's decisive, he's a team player. General Omar Bradley, solid commander, takes care of troops, in charge of U.S. infantry. There's good old Monty. Air Marshal Tedder and Bradley. Leadership, Nazi Germany. Adolf. At this point of the war, Hitler is the greatest resource the Allies have. Initially, he built up Germany, initial victories, but by this point of the war, Hitler's mistakes are doing more to help us than anything else. Stalingrad, huge mistake by Hitler. Hitler believes if the Germans decisively beat the Allies and D-Day fails, we won't try again, and he can transfer 45 divisions to the Russian front. He boasts, I'm the greatest builder of fortifications of all time. Under Hitler, Field Marshal Gerhard von Rundstedt, commander of German forces, Western Europe, cannot cover 2,000 miles of coast with tanks. His plan is to keep the panzer divisions in reserve northwest of Paris, and after we hit the beaches and he knows where we're going to be, then he'll send the tanks. But he's had no experience fighting against opposing forces that have the quantity and quality of air power that the US and the UK possess. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, Desert Fox. He's in charge of defending the beaches, but he works for von Rundstedt. He has seen US and UK air power in North Africa and saw how it led to his defeat. He wants the panzer divisions close to the beaches. He knows he's got to destroy the invading army on the beaches. Once the Allies get their armies into France, Germany will lose the war. So he has the best idea, but he's not high enough in the food chain to make it happen. This is what the Allies are the most afraid of, German armor. Very powerful. One of the things I've talked about in other lectures were German tanks were generally superior to American tanks. We won largely because, a Tiger could take out a dozen Shermans. wasn't going against a dozen Shermans, it was going against 24 Shermans. Quantity has a quality all its own when it comes to the military, but German tanks were lethal. Now here's the German solution to defend France. Rommel gets his wish to put the German infantry on the beaches, but Rundstedt keeps the panzer divisions in reserve. However, the panzer divisions can only be released by Hitler. So we have the worst of all worlds. It's like disaster waiting to happen. Another view of a Tiger tank. The German intelligence expects that we're going to invade the area of France, and I'll have a map for you, called the Pas-de-Calais. It's closest to England, therefore it's the shortest distance across the English Channel. It makes sense. Plus, if we land in the Pas-de-Calais, that landing site is the closest to Germany. So it's a straight shot across France into Germany. So the Germans are convinced that's where we're coming. They're predisposed to believe we will strike the Pas-de-Calais. And there you can see, this is the Pas-de-Calais. This is Dover. Look at the distance here. Nothing. And this is where we wind up going. Big difference. Now, because we know the Germans think we're going to the Pas-de-Calais, we're going to help convince them. So we have a massive disinformation campaign to convince the Germans, yeah, you called it, you're right, we're going to the Pas-de-Calais. We create a fictitious American army, the first U.S. Army that's created and stationed at Kent. The first U.S. Army group, right across from the Pas-de-Calais, commanded by George Patton. Germans think he's our best general. So if Patton's in charge of that army, obviously that's the one they have to worry about. We create false radio traffic, inflatable tanks, fake track marks, dummy aircraft, fake landing craft, everything we can do, because we know the Germans are watching us, to convince them this army is getting ready to go across. This entire fake army helps the Germans to continue to believe that the Pas-de-Calais is the target. Blood and guts, George Patton. Here again, showing the locations and the distances involved. It made sense that the Germans believed that. One of the phony tanks in the First Army Group, or those guys are really strong. Now I want to tell you the story of Garbo, the Spanish spy. I love this stuff. Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, German intelligence thought he was their greatest spy. Trouble was, he's working for us. Now, we helped the Germans believe he was their greatest spy because we would give him true but useless information. So they could constantly see that, oh, he's giving them good stuff. It's not tremendously helpful. It's not going to turn the tide of the war, but the Germans believe he's on their side. This is all setting him up for his greatest achievement on D-Day. So June 6, 1944, early morning, Garbo contacts his German handlers. And he says, hey, there's a massive Allied fleet approaching France towards Normandy. Well, the German soldiers in Normandy just had to pull out their binoculars and go, oh my gosh, 5,000 ships. So once again, Garbo has come through for the Germans. But here's the key. He says this invasion in Normandy is a feint, a ruse, and the Germans should not be fooled. Again, you look out and all the ships in the world. Garbo told the Germans the real invasion would soon be heading to the Pas-de-Calais. Don't be fooled by Normandy. Again, reinforcing what the Germans already believe. So the Germans, even though they're predisposed to do this, now they were really gonna hold their forces in the Pas de Calais. By the time they learned we were never going to the Pas de Calais, Garbo had done his job, and German armored divisions that could have taken part in the fight were immobilized by the intelligence deceptions. Churchill and King George VI, if you saw the movie The King's Speech, that was King George VI. Last minute drama on the part of Churchill. Churchill was a very dramatic man. Just before D-Day, Ike learned that Churchill was going to be with the fleet on D-Day, crossing the Channel. Ike ordered him not to do it, but Churchill said, "You have no authority over me." So soon after that, the king said to Churchill, "Hey, I hear you're going to be on the ships. I'm going to be right next to you." And Churchill said, "I think that's going to be a little too dangerous, Your Majesty." And the king said, "Well, if I can't go, you can't either." And there's no proof that Ike asked the king to do that, but that's the kind of thing that Ike would do. So I want to talk a little about the bombing campaign, because this is critical. 2 months before D-Day, Ike demanded the ability to choose 8th Air Force targets to disrupt transportation infrastructure to hinder French ability to reinforce the beaches. We're bombing German cities. And Ike says, "Well, that's all well and good, but you need to help me achieve success on D-Day." Churchill opposes, fearing too many Frenchmen are going to get killed. Ike has to threaten to resign unless he's given authority over the targets. View of a B-17 Flying Fortress. They contact Charles de Gaulle, the head of the Free French, and say, "How do you feel about this? If we bomb a lot of targets in France, we're going to kill a lot of Frenchmen." And de Gaulle, to his credit, says, "Well, if this is what it takes to defeat the Germans, then we just have to put up with it." And again, where do we bomb a lot? The Pas de Calais. Again, keeping up that deception. Charles de Gaulle. Another view of the 8th Air Force. These are 4th Fighter Wing, 4th Fighter Group, future 4th Fighter Wing Mustangs on D-Day. We'll be talking about them. They're right down the road. Got to talk about them. So we'll be talking about them. Now, what do our fighters do on D-Day? Our fighters were tasked with preventing the German Luftwaffe from attacking and reinforcing the beaches. Of course, that wasn't the big problem. What they mostly did was prevent German troops, armor, and transportation from getting to the beaches. So they're east of the beaches, bombing, strafing, taking out bridges, convoys, keeping the German forces away. And a lot of air-to-air battle is going on east of Normandy. We'll talk a little bit about naval bombardment on D-Day. Allied fleet, including 8 battleships, the British Rodney, Nelson, Warspite, Ramillies, U.S. Texas, Nevada, which had been sunk at Pearl Harbor, refloated, Arkansas, and a French battleship, Lorraine. Also 18 cruisers, 43 destroyers, 2 gunboats, and a heavy gun monitor. The naval bombardment was too short, did not fire enough shells, did not achieve the desired results. As we'll see, the heroes of the day, the destroyers. View of the HMS Nelson, HMS Rodney. Big guns doesn't necessarily mean they can take out what they need to take out. Now, the problem with invading Normandy, it's not a port. It's not a port city. We've learned from Dieppe trying to take a port, really tough. So we created artificial harbors called mulberries that could be towed across the channel, and the concept worked. That's what the mulberries look like. Those are all separate. That's one piece, that's one piece, that's one piece. So they're towed across the English Channel and then connected. Now, and talk about the basic plan of invasion and what the different parts did. 2 American, 82nd and 101st, Fell Band of Brothers, 101st Airborne, and the British 6th Airborne dropped behind enemy lines early in the morning before the beach landings. Their job, destroy some bridges, capture others, disrupt communications, take out artillery, slow down German reinforcements, generally disrupt the Germans' ability to react to the landings. Eisenhower and the 101st Airborne, this is just before they load their planes to get dropped over France. The reason he went to spend time with these guys is he was told they would sustain 80% casualties. And Ike was, if I'm going to lose most of these guys, the least I could do is wish them well and say goodbye. The Rangers, 2nd Ranger Battalion, scale the sheer cliffs of Pointe du Hoc, destroy the German heavy artillery. Unknown to the Allies, the Germans had removed much of it prior to D-Day. 5th Ranger Battalion lands on Omaha Beach with the 29th Division to support the landings. View of the Rangers climbing the cliffs. Engineers land with the infantry, clear mines and beach obstacles. Germans have mines and obstacles everywhere. Clear pathways through German barbed wire. Did you all see the movie Saving Private Ryan? They use the Bangalore torpedoes to blow up the German barbed wire and everything. That's the engineers doing that. Combat engineers, we clear the way. The infantry, well, they're the workhorses. Land, seize the fortified beaches, take out German defensive positions, eliminate German resistance on the beaches, break through, expand the beachhead for reinforcements to get ashore, and create a breakout from the beaches. All falls to the infantry, ultimately. Guys getting off the beach. Now, we invented things to help with the invasion, tanks and funnies. DD, duplex drive, or Donald Duck Sherman tanks, and I'll have a picture for you, fitted with a flotation screen to allow the tanks to float. 2 propellers were added and powered by the tank engine. In addition to the DD tanks, the British funnies included flail tanks to destroy mines, armored ramps for climbing seawalls, fascine carriers for crossing ditches, and bridging tanks. That's a DD tank. It's supposed to embark in the water and drive to the beach. The trouble was that only works if there's really, really calm water. You get any waves at all, doesn't work. These are your beachheads. American, Utah, Omaha, and then British Canadian, Gold, Juno, and Sword. June 5th is when we're supposed to go, but the weather is horrible, horrible. And troops are loaded onto the ships. The invasion was underway. Bad weather moves in. And the weather gurus promised Ike a weather window of opportunity on 6 June 1944. One of the critical decisions of the war, Ike said, we got to take advantage of this window, because if they didn't go, it would be a while before we had the right tides and the right moonlight for the invasion. View of the storm at sea. Now, the bad weather actually helped us tremendously. Rommel, seeing the weather report, went back to Germany to visit his family. He's gone. His next in command, Friedrich Dahlmann, is 100 miles behind the lines with the rest of the German leadership engaged in war games. So on D-Day, senior German leadership is gone. You know, better lucky than good. We lucked out on that one. Now, this is why we call this lecture The Great Crusade. because that's how Eisenhower talks about this. Not going to read the whole thing, just some highlights, but he basically proposed this whole operation as the Great Crusade against the Germans. And the way that he phrased it, the Germans are powerful, evil, we've got to overcome them, but we've been winning. We can do this. You know, the Germans they're going to fight savagely. They're battle hardened, but you can do this. This is the Great Crusade. After World War II, his account of his actions in World War II was called Crusade in Europe. Then continuing, again, talking about how the air offensive has helped us, how our home front has given us all the tools, the arsenal of democracy. The United States was building more ships, bombs, planes, tanks, bullets than the entire rest of the world combined. Think about that. So our troops had the stuff. And then he finishes up seeking Almighty God's approval and assistance to make this happen. The D-Day airborne assault, 82nd, 101st fly behind enemy lines due to flak, weather, and pilot errors. The airborne troops are scattered all over the place, far from where they should be. Commands are separated, troops find each other and begin to accomplish their mission. Again, an advantage, because they were so scattered and spread over such a wide area. The Germans thought there were many, many more paratroopers than there were. Plus, we had, I think they were about this big, dummy paratroopers that would parachute with firecrackers and all kinds of stuff, and that kind of messed things up for the Germans too. View of the paratroopers coming down. Despite casualties, enemy resistance, commands being mixed, officers and NCOs did what Americans do, gathered everybody together, did their job, blew up the bridges, cut the lines, seized key locations, attacked German soldiers. And again, because they're so spread out, makes it even more confusing for the Germans. Now the bombardment assault, the heavy bombers bombing the beachhead, terrible. And a lot of it was because when the bombers go to bomb the beachheads, they wanted to be sure they didn't hit our troops. So they waited so long that they didn't hit our troops, but they didn't hit the Germans either. The bombs landed behind the German positions. Another view of the B-17s escorted by the P-51s. The actual assaults. Higgins boats, other landing craft had a tough time due to rough seas, smoke, mines, obstacles, German artillery fire. Many landing craft were lost or the troops were discharged too far out in the wrong place. A lot of them drowned because they're carrying so much equipment. If they got off in the sea over their head, they drowned. Most of them were horribly seasick. General Teddy Roosevelt Jr., who had a heart condition and walked with a cane, realized that they were in the wrong spot and famously said, okay, we'll start the war from right here. Again, that American attitude of we're going to get it done. Almost all those DD tanks for the Americans were using sank before they got to shore. View from the landing craft. Again, imagine being in one of those ships approaching the French shore, knowing all the Germans in the world were waiting for you. And I love this picture, organized chaos. Imagine trying to figure out who, what, when, where, and why when you're in the middle of that. Of the 6 beaches, success and victory, 4 out of 5. Utah Beach, even with some difficulties, within 2 hours, our troops are moving off the beach and linking up with the paratroopers. Huge. Gold Beach, UK, despite savage fire from the Germans, their funnies worked. I don't know why. Maybe the sea was calmer in that part of the beach. and they were soon moving inland. Another look at the beaches. Juno Beach, Canada, intense fire from Germans, but again, the British funnies helped here too. They're soon moving off the beaches. Sword Beach, UK, light German resistance, within hours linked up with glider-borne troops at the Caen Canal. Omaha, this was where it was bad. The geography, steep cliffs, and German resistance were by far the worst. Troops began landing at 0630, many machine gunned before they got off their landing craft. Almost all the DD tanks failed to make shore. Point du Hoc, 220 Rangers begin the ascent. Less than 80 are left in action by nightfall. 0830, the beach is clogged with men and equipment and vehicles. Additional landings are called off because there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to put them. Again, organized chaos. Seizing victory. Small unit leadership. Junior officers. Again, Saving Private Ryan. Tom Hanks and his guys clawing their way off that beach. Despite casualties and lack of tank support, our citizen soldiers prevailed over the German veterans. As men and equipment move off the beach, we can continue landing reinforcements. Some of the German obstacles. Talked about the American destroyers. The destroyers can see what's happening on the beaches. They can see it's bad. They move so close to the beach that some of them even grounded and had to pull off the beach. But they fired hundreds of 5-inch shells against German positions. Now, they're supposed to keep a supply of shells in case the German Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, shows up. No way. They fired every single shell they had. Their fire was so effective that the German forces on the beaches tried to surrender to the destroyers. They're using semaphore flags. Stop shooting, we give up. And the destroyers semaphored back, surrendered to the guys on the beach. So the destroyers were the real heroes of the Navy that day. What happened at Omaha? Why was it so bad? Well, intel said defenses were manned by Polish and Russian troops, low morale, 1 battalion. Nope, 3 battalions of crack Germans. Cloud cover caused the bombers to miss the beach. Battleship cruiser bombardment too brief. And again, troops seasick, confused when they hit the beach. Another view of running into machine gun fire. Almost no tank support. 1 German gunner fired 62,000 rounds. Think about that. Scary stuff. American troops were bunched, so the Germans were able to concentrate their fire. And again, they offloaded so far from shore, water above their head, lost a lot of guys before they even got there. Another view of storming the beaches. Now, by the end of the day, around 2,200, unloading at the beaches ceased. It's 10 o'clock. Around 175,000 American, British, and Canadians were ashore, the invasion front stretching over 90 kilometers. Now, there's gaps. The gaps aren't going to be closed for a couple of days. 18 kilometers between Utah and Omaha, 11 between Omaha and Gold. The Germans didn't exploit either opportunity. Approximately 4,900 Allied casualties, that's actually killed. And that sounds horrible, but could have been so much worse. And of course, we had a lot of wounded, but 4,900 killed. Now, the Germans spent 4 years and massive manpower and material to build the Atlantic Wall. At Utah, we were held up for less than an hour. At Gold, Juno, and Sword, we were held up for about an hour. At Omaha, the 1st and 29th Divisions were held up for less than a day. So think about all the resources that the Germans put to create Festung Europa, and in less than a day, the Allies overcame all of these obstacles. Now, look at some of the German mistakes. The Atlantic Wall was the German Maginot Line. Fixed defenses, built at great cost, feared but quickly defeated. Hitler, the only one that could release the panzer divisions, but he slept in that day. So the panzer divisions didn't get released. Rommel was right. Allied air power hampered reinforcements. By the time German armor closed with Allied armies, it was too weak to attack. The SS Panzer Division Das Reich was supposed to take 3 days to get to the beaches. Took 2 weeks. Panzer Lehr, the other German armor division, lost 5 tanks, 84 armored vehicles, and 130 other vehicles to air attacks just getting to the beaches. German destroyed tanks. Now, Napoleon couldn't cross the Channel. Hitler couldn't cross the Channel. We crossed it virtually unopposed because the German Navy and the German Luftwaffe couldn't stop us. And we could reinforce our men in France at will and give them all the supplies they needed. The English Channel was supposed to be impossible to cross, but as it turned out, the Allies could cross the English Channel much more easily than the Germans could cross the French countryside because we owned the air. That was the primary reason for that. Again, more German destroyed tanks. One of the things I love about General Eisenhower, the morning of D-Day, he took a moment and he sat down and he took a sheet of paper and a pen and he wrote out a message. Our landings in the Cherbourg Harbor area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops. This is if the invasion failed. My decision to attack at this time and place was based on the best information available. The troops, the air, and the Navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. What a patriot. What a great, great American. Now, what are the results of D-Day? American, British, Canadian armies are in France. Once breakout is achieved, doesn't happen overnight, takes a while, but we're heading across Europe going into Germany. Less than a year after D-Day, Germany surrenders. Instead of the Russian armies making it to the Atlantic, we met the Russian armies in the heart of Germany. So Eastern Europe was lost, but Western Europe was preserved. Again, I had talked about the arsenal of democracy. Once we're on the European continent, our overwhelming superiority in every kind of stuff that you need to wage war came to the fore. Now, I talked about Operation Bagration, the Russian assault against the Germans. The D-Day, the Normandy campaign, which they estimated was 6 June to 21 July, 130,000 were killed on both sides. A lot of folks. But during that same time, the Germans and Russians lost 450,000 men in Operation Bagration. And this is something important to understand. For the entire war, for every German soldier killed in every other campaign, France, Italy, Battle of Britain, the Atlantic, Poland, North Africa, for every German soldier who dies, 5 German soldiers are killed on the Russian front. The Russian front, 80% of the German war machine was on the Russian front. And the Russian front is where the German war machine was annihilated. Like I say, Russia is where the German army went to die. View of the Russian army attacking. That's the Russian T-34 tank. Tiger might have been a little bit better, but there was a whole lot more of these. Easy to produce, easy to take into battle, and considered the tank that did the most to destroy the German army. Got to talk about the 4th Fighter Group on D-Day. Again, right down the road. Got to talk about these guys. This is Lieutenant Kid Hofer and his dog Duke. Kid Hofer's biography was titled The Last of the Screwball Aces. He joined the RAF Eagle Squadrons out of a sense of adventure. He would take Duke up in his P-51 Mustang on training missions. He would fly right alongside another American plane, but he would duck down in the cockpit so the other pilot would look over and go, damn, the Germans are teaching their dogs how to fly. And how did they get a Mustang? So he liked to have a good time. Now this was my wife and I, our good friend, Lieutenant Frank Spear. We had the honor of becoming good friends with him. He's gone now. But he was Spear's wingman. He was Hofer's wingman. Hofer's favorite thing to do on the way home from a mission escorting bombers was to strafe German airfields. Now, what's the most dangerous thing an American fighter pilot can do in World War II? Strafe German airfields, because they surrounded them with flak towers. They didn't want to lose their planes. So on the way back, poor Frank, has to be Hofer's wingman. So Hofer goes in first, Frank is covering him. Frank used to always say, I'm sure they were shooting at Hofer, but they got me. So he spent the last year of the war as a POW. Colonel Don Blakesley, he's the guy, greatest air combat leader of all time, head of the 4th Fighter Group. June 5th, 1944, he calls the entire 4th Fighter Group together to brief them about D-Day. He said, we're close enough to the beaches, we're going to fly multiple missions, we're going to keep the Luftwaffe and other reinforcements away from the beaches. He stressed the danger involved. He couldn't stress that enough. Toward the end of the briefing, Blakesley stated, if at the end of the day tomorrow, if we have successfully landed our armies and none of us make it back to base, that's okay. His men literally saluted him, like, yes sir, all in, we're with you. Now Captain McGrattan, he's sitting over to the side. He's going home. He's got his orders. He's done. He's an ace, had, flown his hours, done his thing, raised his hand and said, hey Colonel, you got an airplane for me? Blakesley says, heck yeah. So McGrattan's going. So that's a view of Bernard Lewis McGrattan, 4th Fighter Group. On D-Day, McGrattan's assigned to Blue Flight under Kid Hofer's command. The first mission they fly, Hofer's strafing a German locomotive as he's yelling, whoopee, a train. That was Hofer. He loved this stuff. Second mission of the day, Blue Flight was strafing a German column. Now the trouble when you're strafing, you're low to the ground. And if you get jumped by enemy planes, you're really vulnerable. So these 5 planes were jumped by 15 German FW-190 fighters, one of the Germans' best fighter planes. Four out of the 5 are shot down. All 4 pilots are killed, including McGrattan. The only one who makes it away is Kid Hofer, showing a German train being strafed by a 4th Fighter Group P-51. German FW-190 fighter. Does that look lethal enough for you? Nasty piece of work. End of D-Day for the 4th Fighter Group. Group flew a 3rd mission, shooting up convoys, railways, sustaining losses in the process. They returned to Debden at 11:40 p.m. Lieutenant Gillette, a new pilot, described a CO. By now, I was truly impressed by Colonel Blakesley. He was out to fight a war and to win that war. He had a way to do it, and the way to do it was always his way. It was proving successful, and I could feel all the other guys were really behind him. View of our 4th Fighter Group fighters. Some observations on what happened on D-Day. Admiral Ramsey, Royal Navy, I just love how he's just so polite. We have still to establish ourselves on land. The Navy has done its part well. News considered satisfactory. Still, on the whole, we have very much to thank God for this day. Just a very British, very job well done sort of thing. You gotta love it. That's Admiral Ramsey. Major John Howard, he's with the British Paratroop Airborne Division. His men, the Oxen Bucks, had captured Pegasus Bridge, a key objective. They held it for so long that when they handed it over to the Warwickshire Regiment, one of Howard's men said he found it hard to leave. You see, we'd been there a full day and night. We rather felt this was our bit of territory. Gotta love these guys. Sergeant John Ellery, 16th Regiment, 1st Division, Easy Red Sector, Omaha Beach. The first night in France I spent in a ditch beside a hedgerow wrapped in a damp shelter hat, thoroughly exhausted, but I felt elated. It had been the greatest experience of my life. I was 10 feet tall. No matter what happened, I had made it off the beach and reached the high ground. I was king of the hill, at least in my own mind, for a moment. My contribution to the heroic tradition of the United States Army might have been the smallest achievement in the history of courage, but at least for a time, I had walked in the company of very brave men. This is Dick Winters, Band of Brothers, 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne. At a minute past midnight, he's in a C-47 praying to live through the day. He won the Distinguished Service Cross in the morning, taking out 4 German 105 artillery pieces. At midnight, he got on his knees and thanked God for getting him through the day. He made a promise to himself if he survived the war, he would find a quiet farm and spend the rest of his life in peace and quiet. He kept his promise. That's Dick in the center, making sure his men are ready to go. Another friend of mine, he's also long gone now, Lieutenant Joe Higgins, 4th Fighter Group. This was his report after D-Day. Our mission was to keep the Luftwaffe planes from getting through to the landing beaches. On our crossing of the 100 miles of sea between England and France, we could see thousands of ships making the crossing in waves. These ships would be arriving all day long and landing wave after wave. It was indeed an extraordinary sight to behold. After 5 hours of patrolling, we returned to Debden. That's the Boxing Eagle that the 4th Fighter Group used and continues to use to this day. Now it's the 334th Fighter Squadron, and it was designed by Walt Disney. Lieutenant Higgins continued. We refueled, loaded 2 500-pound bombs, returned to Normandy. We bombed and strafed truck convoys. After more patrolling, we returned to Debden. The last planes landed after 2340 hours, 20 hours and 20 minutes after the first planes took off. Heck of a day. We lost 10 planes on D-Day. They probably had 70-something total. So 10, that's a lot. 7 of the pilots were killed, 2 bailed out and became POWs. 1 bailed out and evaded, made it back to Allied lines. Now what happened to Kid Hofer and Duke? Several weeks after D-Day, the 4th Fighter Group was returning from a mission. Hofer took off with no wingman in search of a German airfield to strafe. He found one, but after several passes, his aircraft was hit by flak, and the last of the screwball aces was killed. Back at Debden, they knew the moment Hofer died, because Duke started to howl and wail in a manner no one had ever seen before. Duke's best buddy was gone forever. That's the true meaning of D-Day. Any questions? Sir?
You mentioned earlier in your comment, what is an inflatable tank? Did you use the term inflatable tank?
The tank had an inflatable part that went around it. Oh, I'm sorry. You're talking about the tank that they were picking up. That was an inflatable tank. In other words, from the air, it looks like a perfectly serviceable Sherman tank, but it's a complete decoy. It's plastic and full of air. That's why the picture showed the guys holding it up off the ground.
How many personnel or soldiers were in a division? Because you mentioned earlier, like 42 divisions went in here or there. How many persons would it be per division?
It differed based on the size of the division. I think kind of a ballpark, maybe between 20 and 40,000, depending on the size. Sir?
I think it's lower.
Lower?
The airborne divisions were around 15 to 18,000.
Okay.
And the, like the 29th, I think, was about 18 to 20,000.
And again, when I talk about the Russian front, hundreds of divisions on both sides. It's insane, the numbers that were involved out there. So, sir.
I noticed that there are a lot of balloons hanging over the beaches with cables hanging down. That's not mentioned, it's not named.
To prevent German fighters from trying to strafe the ships. They would also do the same thing over London to help protect London from the German Luftwaffe.
Toward the end of World War II, maybe the mid, B-17s were being learned, the pilots were learning how to fly them right here at Seymour Johnson, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Probably, some of them may have been in the invasion on that day.
Uh-huh.
But during the time they were training here, 25 men crashed and were killed right here around Wayne County, the local area. 25.
Not surprised. One of the great untold stories of World War II is the fact that we were a nation with a very small military that was at peace prior to World War II. And we created the largest, most powerful Air Force in the world. And in the process, many people died in training. The numbers are just extraordinary.
I never concluded whether it was those young men with inexperience dying or if it was poor quality of the aircraft. Probably one or the other, maybe both.
Both, and accidents. I know there were several times where the 4th Fighter Group coming back from a mission, they would have to land at other bases because they were running out of fuel. And there were instances where we had pilots who were killed getting back to Debden because they hit power lines. I mean, you know, you're fighting this horrible war, but still you have accidents. You have pilots in training that collide with other pilots. So it's a dangerous business, especially when you have to take so many thousands and thousands of men and teach them very quickly to fly high-performance aircraft.
I don't mean to hog your time.
That's totally fine.
But I noticed one of the aircraft toward the end of your presentation was a C something aircraft, not a B or a C. Generally, I think that would be in a cargo plane.
I think that was the C-47 that the paratroopers went in.
Wow.
So that was to deliver the paratroopers to the drop zones. Thank you so very much. I very much enjoyed speaking with you this evening and appreciate your coming.
Thank you so much, Dr. Heidicker, for that wonderful presentation. And again, I'd like to thank all of you for coming tonight. It's so wonderful to see a community come together to observe this history when you could be anywhere else. So we appreciate your support of our programming and of our library.